here's Brody Brazil.
The topic of this video, I think, is going to continue to be one of the biggest high-level deals in professional sports for the rest of this 2020s decade. And that is public funding for sports venues across North America. There's some history with this, there is some current controversy with this, and I say looking forward because the future, if this continues, does not look bright for a bunch of different teams and what they'll want and what government entities are not willing to give up anymore. Certainly taxpayers are fans, but they have feelings in this too. It gets very messy very quick. And I'm actually surprised that Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred, he recently directly commented on this issue and on this topic at the 2024 Associated Press Sports Editors Commissioners meetings. Here's what Rob Manfred said first, quote, "There has been a long history of public financing of not just baseball, but sports venues in general. Expenditure, public funds that people have seen justified as part of the quality of life and entertainment opportunities available to residents in particular cities, as well as an economic driver." Certainly on the latter point, I recognize this is something that some will debate. But whatever the merits of it across the board, investment in baseball facilities is the best of the sports investments because of the number of games. It just drives more people into the market for entertainment than any other sport, just based on sheer volume. He goes on to say, "I do think that in today's world, almost all projects, whether they be new stadiums, major renovations, all of those types of projects, almost without exception, and this is different than it was a couple decades ago, are public-private partnerships with owners of teams making really substantial hundreds of millions of dollars in investments. I think the Las Vegas project is a great example of that. It's a $1.5 billion project with a public financing. I think the number is $380 million, and he is correct, plus more incentives for the A's and tax breaks and all that. And the rest of that investment is going to be made by the owner." End quote. The problem is, Manfred can feel that way, and he can represent his business that way and its owners that way, but economists don't agree with that. When a stadium gets public financing, it doesn't necessarily pay the public back as expected, maybe to some degrees, maybe to no degree. This comes from CBSSports.com. I'll read their take on it about what Manfred said. Manfred is correct that the practice of public financing of pro sports venues is an entrenched one. Yeah, it's got some history. It's happened for decades, and maybe a lot when times were different. That's how it started. Just as entrenched, however, is the evidence that the economic driver aspect of ballpark construction is non-existent. Academic research on this issue is unequivocal. Cities and states do not receive anything close to adequate return on their investments in pro sports facilities, be they ballparks, basketball arenas, football stadiums, or whatever. Now, the CBSSports.com article references certain studies and research reports, but I wanted you to hear it straight from some people who would know about this.
I am Ed English, and I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and today I'm joined by Dr. Robert Botte, Professor of Economics from Lake Forest College. And we're going to discuss the impact of sports on urban economic development. Dr. Botte, you have a presentation called, "Is the Gamble on Sports as a Stimulus for Urban Economic Development a Good Bet?" What is the simple answer to that question?
No, well, usually not, and so there are many reasons for that. But in part, we're talking about a risk-reward ratio that doesn't necessarily work in an urban economy's favor.
One of the things, in looking through some of the work that you've done, talked about how the forecasts that proponents of subsidies will forecast rarely match the actual economic numbers once it's done. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The problem is that you really have to look at the details of any professional sports project to get an understanding for what it's likely to do to an urban economy. And what we usually have happening with advocates is they ignore some of the realities, meaning that they generally understate the costs and overstate the benefits of a project, and you need a more sober appraisal than that. And objective economic research would generally indicate that it doesn't do what it is that advocates argue a professional sports infrastructure investment will do for an urban economy.
When he said sober approach, I feel like he was talking directly to me. But no, I understand that point, is that it's oversold and underperforms eventually. Now, that video, I want to say, was about 10 years old, but you'd have to think it has aged well. In fact, it has aged better than even when it was said, because projects 10 years ago were usually just a stadium and then maybe some small development around it. But nowadays, every stadium project is the ballpark, it's the arena, and it's 70 other acres of hotels, retail, commercial space, residential, luxury condos. How many times do we hear that over and over again? So here, in my opinion, is where the problem lies. There's actually 4 different points here to make about the main problem of public funding and why it's controversial and why maybe it used to be accepted, but there's no longer room for that. And number 1 is that cities, counties, states, and taxpayers in general are harder pressed financially than ever before. They don't necessarily have the room that maybe they used to in the 1960s or 70s. And I think we need to understand that, as Manfred mentioned, there's a tradition behind this. There is some history behind it, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that it can or should continue here in the 2020s. And so with local governments harder pressed for money and situations, and schools need money, and hospitals need money, and law enforcement needs money, and now all of a sudden sports look like a luxury and it's harder to pull off. Sports teams have long relied on public money and tax breaks, and their take on this, their opinion and position, is that they don't want to lose it. They've been so successful in luring these public government agencies to give them money, and so obviously they're feeling a little bit more crunched and pressured by this, and that's why you hear talks of relocation. They will literally take it to the most extreme thing possible to try and gain leverage in these situations. It's no longer, hey, we'll negotiate, we'll bargain. It's, we're just going to leave. If we can't get this done, we're going to leave. And again, that's why I think this continues to be one of the highest level, big picture problems in pro sports right now. It happens in hockey, it happens in baseball, basketball, to some degree football. Teams are very charged up on the fact that they see the landscape changing. They see what just happened in Kansas City. The Chiefs and Royals, and the Chiefs just won the Super Bowl, all they asked for was a current sales tax that benefits them to continue. And voters said, no, we don't want this to go on another 40 years. We're going to stop it right here, right now. Sports teams are also all trying to get into the whole real estate and development side of things, like I mentioned before. If we were only asking for a stadium here and there, and it was just the stadium, and that's the total cost. But nowadays it has to be a stadium, like I said, and 50 plus other acres of a development, and all of that needs infrastructure and improvements. And the teams are trying to get away with tax breaks of sales tax, of property tax, you name it. They're trying to cut the corners to make this beneficial for them. And yeah, they will dump in a certain amount of money, but that certain amount of money is stretched out over 30, 40, 50 years. All in the meantime, they're getting huge kickbacks in return. And then there's the last kind of problem here, which is separate but very much associated to this. Sports venues in our culture, do they really need to be replaced and thoroughly renovated every 25 years? Like, we're not doing the venues and facilities right from the hop, from the start, if they need this constant like renovation and keeping up with the Joneses. And like, you need to maybe maintain these venues on your own, number one, as the sports team, but also periodically over time, instead of, hey, every 20, 25, 30 years, we need a new spot. That seems almost unreasonable. It doesn't seem responsible or sustainable either. That sports venues have a lifespan these days of like 25, 30, maybe 35 years. And last thing here, just circling back to the initial comment by Rob Manfred about the quality of life of a baseball team in particular in this case, I don't think anybody can deny the amenity of having a hometown baseball team or whatever team, pro sports team, in your local market. There is something to be said, a common rooting interest. People can rally and gather around their team and wear their colors and logo. Like, I'm not going to doubt that at all. If anybody understands the amenity it is, it's me. But there becomes kind of a fine line of amenity versus burden. And nobody likes that threat of when the team doesn't get the money they want and they're super charged up about this is our focus, and if we don't get this focus, we're out of here. Nobody likes that looming over their head, the constant threat of what will these teams do if they don't get what they want. And I'll leave it with this, quality of life. Let's talk about that. Not sports fans. You have to remember, you're watching this video, you're likely a sports fan. Step outside our bubble for just a second. How about people who don't really care about sports? They're more into the symphony or the ballet, or they're into painting or hiking or art or whatever. They do other things. They spend their money elsewhere. What would make more people in your community, in my community, generally happier? Paying for a new stadium publicly, or even giving a couple $100 million to a new stadium? Or what if I said that the government was going to be giving every adult, let's start at $1,000 of straight cash? What do you think the quality of life return and response would be if it's either a stadium that you can just go to and spend more money there and a team, or here's $1,000 for everybody? I hate to say it, as much as, like I said, you and I are all in the sports world and we love our teams and we love a new stadium, the vote on that is going to instantly go to the $1,000 for every adult. There's just no question about it. That's a referendum style vote. So anyway, it is a problem. Public funding of pro sports teams. This is not going away. This is only escalating. That's maybe the word I was searching for earlier. This has been an issue. It's only spiraling. It's only getting tighter as it spirals, and we'll see where it goes in the rest of the 2020s decade. You made it here to the end of the video. You know I really appreciate that. So if you would, go down there right now, give me a thumbs up on this video. That'll help me. That'll help this channel. That'll help this video. And by the way, I would also love it if you would take some time to go down there and hit that subscribe button, because that means videos I make in the future will be recommended to you. And you know, I would love to see you back here next time.